Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this latest edition of our Musician Monday. I have the distinct honor and privilege of having my friend and amazing pianist, Ian Weinberger, here with me, and he is going to help us understand a lot about everything, about the world at large, about the piano specifically, about the show Hamilton, for which he happens to be the music director. He's the conductor. He's the pianist. He's a little bit of everything. He teaches the actors and the fellow musicians how to make it all come together the way it beautifully does, and has been on Broadway now for quite some time. Ian, thank you so much for joining us and lending your talents and your expertise and your thoughts on everything.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I feel so fancy. Musician Monday. This feels great. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Yes, you are an alliterative
That's right.
Phenomenon.
That's right. I feel fantastic.
Good. I'm glad. I think that most anyone who knows anything about Broadway knows how amazing Hamilton is. The story of Alexander Hamilton having been told through hip hop music, which is just a really cool idea, and everyone I know who has seen it has just raved about it. It obviously continues to be an absolute fan favorite, and you've been integral to it. The music is so important, given that it's a musical, of course, but you do a lot of other things, and I want you to tell us something about that. But you also have a group that's called Freestyle of Supreme, and first of all, that's a supreme name. I love the name, especially in these times of turmoil and trouble, that all those concepts, I think, have come into play in the news and in our hearts and in our souls. So tell me a little bit about Freestyle of Supreme before we go on to the Hamilton world.
Sure. Well, I'm smiling because any opportunity to talk about Freestyle of Supreme is a joy. I am lucky to be a part of it. I love being a part of it. I can't take any credit for it. The group is about 15 or 16 years old, and is a brainchild of a few people, among them Lin-Manuel Miranda. He and Tommy Kail, who's the director of Hamilton as well, and a dear friend of theirs, and now a dear friend of mine named Anthony Veneziali. The three of them started this group in about 2003, 2004. It is a hip hop improv group, improv hip hop comedy freestyle group. The best way to describe it, I have found, is by explaining a little bit that most people have been to an improv show of some kind in their life, an improv comedy show. If you imagine Whose Line Is It Anyway, or an improv comedy show like it, meets the Wu-Tang Clan.
Wow.
And so it's fun. It's an improv show just like any other improv show, except that the whole thing is in rhyme. And the whole thing is set to music that is also improvised on the spot. So it's a few rappers, MCs, 3 to 5, let's say, MCs, plus 2 keyboard players and a beatboxer. And that's the musical element. And we make it all up on the spot. And I've been with the group for not quite a year and a half. I'm pretty new to it. But I got to join the group for their off-Broadway run earlier last year. And then we played about 4 months on Broadway at the end of 2019 and into the top of this year, which was a thrill. So it's really fun and really dangerous because by definition, there is no script. And you get out there and make some music up at the moment, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's really special and cool. So you have a day job. Your day job is you do basically everything on Hamilton.
Yeah.
And Hamilton, for our viewers who do not know about it, maybe maybe they live under a rock if they don't know about it. But But it is something that's had an extraordinary run. It's still going strong, and except for the fact that Broadway is dark, which I'm going to
That's
want
right.
you to
It
comment
was going
on in a
very
minute.
strong until like March 11th.
Right. Boy, that's crazy. But I mean, what's unique about it, I think, is that I know that it was one of only 10 Broadway musicals to win a Pulitzer Prize, which is super cool. And I think it's won 11 Tony Awards. And so kudos to you and everyone else, the cast and the producers and everyone, for that extraordinary successful run. And hopefully, well, tell me this right off the bat. I know you're not an epidemiologist. You may be a doctor in a former life, but you're not currently a practicing physician. So tell me what is your instinct? What's your gut instinct from everything you hear through the grapevine about when there's going to be some light on Broadway again?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it's interesting because we thought, I don't want to speak for anybody else, I thought Broadway was invincible. And in end of February, top of March of this year, I'm reading the news just like everybody else. And I thought to myself, sure, like this could be inconvenient, but Broadway doesn't close for anything.
Right.
I don't know this for sure, but Broadway, I'm going to have to look this up again. But after 9/11, I think Broadway was dark for a day or two.
Yes, correct.
And came right back. Broadway was dark for a few days for a musician strike about 17 years ago, and was dark for a couple weeks for a crew strike, and that's kind of it. Broadway doesn't close for anything, and so like we are raised, us theater people, on the ethos of the show must go on. And if your leading person or your conductor or your whoever like has a broken foot or is bleeding out their eyes, like you find a way to do the show. This is a very unusual experience for us, but I think it's been long enough now. I mean, we're talking today in the middle of June, and it's been 3 months. And so we've gotten a little bit used to it. So I realize I haven't answered your question yet, which is based on what I hear in the grapevine, because of course it is one of the things that we talk about pretty constantly in our Broadway circle. At first we thought it was 4 weeks. That was the initial announcement, was that Broadway is closing down for 4 weeks so we can get a handle on it, and we'll be back to it in the middle of April. And of course that turned out not to happen for very obvious reasons. I think, we're in a tough spot because as much as we love what we do and we think what we do is important and useful and contributing to the health of the world, it is not essential. It is a very voluntary thing to put on a show and a very voluntary thing to come and see a show, much as it is a sporting event. And you're by nature congregating a lot of people into one room. So the long and the short of it is probably not until there is a vaccine, I would guess, or a treatment or a herd immunity of some kind, something that makes it safe for a couple of thousand people to be under one roof together. That may be different around the country. And smaller theaters might have it much easier. Like a small theater somewhere that seats 50 people might be able to come back much sooner. But I think for Broadway, looking into my crystal ball, I imagine spring or fall of 2021 or later. That's my guess today.
Yeah. Well, it's probably obviously a very educated guess. And, one of the components of it is that you can take the audience, just like restaurants are now socially distancing and they can be at roughly 50% capacity. And theoretically, you could do that with the audience. You could spread them out, and anybody who's not together, they could be spread out just like on an airplane, but in a theater. But the musicians, you need the full gamut of musicians in the pit, and you guys are maybe not you specifically because you're playing keyboard, but everyone, and you're conducting, but everyone else is jammed in there. Tell me about that, because they're at risk. I mean, they're elbow to elbow, if I'm not mistaken.
For sure. You're absolutely right. We are lucky at Hamilton to surprisingly have a good amount of elbow room in our pit orchestra. Part of it is that the pit at the Richard Rodgers Theater, which is where Hamilton plays, was built, maybe not intentionally, but has housed in its history orchestras in the mid 20s, 24, 25, 26, or something like that.
Oh,
and Hamilton has 10 musicians. So we're playing with some space in there anyway, but you're right in that it is still a pretty small space. We're not on top of each other, but we're not 6 feet apart.
Sure.
And it's an enclosed space. It's a true pit orchestra at the Richard Rodgers, but they've built the stage out over it. So it's an enclosed space. And it's a low ceiling and it's dark and you're sitting next to people. I think more than the musicians, though, I would take your point and extend it to the actors and the crew backstage, where the space is even smaller. And in terms of actors, they have to dance with each other and hold each other and lift each other and maybe share props, take letters from each other on stage. Sometimes people are kissing on stage. People are sharing dressing room space. There's all sorts of logistical stuff that goes into it. That's a part of it.
Cool. So real fast, tell me what your role, you are the pianist, you're the conductor, you're the music director, and you do other things as well. Give us a little snapshot of kind of what your whole spectrum of functions are.
Of my Hamiltonian life.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think the fastest way to imagine it is this, that on paper, the job sort of has 2 or maybe 3 components to it. Really, the one that is most visible, let's say, is to be the full-time conductor of the orchestra. So there I am on the podium conducting from the keyboard, as let's say about half of the shows on Broadway are, as opposed to conducting with a baton like in a traditional orchestra setting. But at Hamilton, you conduct from the keyboard up on the podium. And there I am leading the orchestra and conducting the musical. Let's say there's 8 shows a week. I probably would on average do 5 or 6 shows a week as the conductor. That's sort of the one element that's most known to the audience, because that's sort of what you see, is a guy up there waving his hands around. The second element of it is that I work with all of our actors, as you point out. It's my gig to work with a new actor every time someone new joins our company as a replacement actor, and to sort of teach them the music in collaboration with we have an associate music director and a team of people who teach the music. But it's my gig to sort of sit with those actors and talk about their musical choices and clarify perhaps the intention of what they're trying to say musically, or clean up some musical choices, or talk about the specificity of the lyrics that they're trying to get through, and to clear up those kinds of things, and to make sure that, for instance, the voice sounds in a certain register the way it's supposed to, and to sort of do those one-on-one sessions. And then the third element of it is sort of the maintenance of the show musically. It's my job to sort of be responsible for everything musical in the show from night to night. And so part of the conducting of it all is I keep a little pad and paper on the podium right next to the keyboard, and in my 4 bars off here or 8 bars off there, or while I play with the other hand, I might jot things down that I hear. And then it is the job to follow up on those things, whether that's with musicians in the orchestra or maybe sub musicians, especially in the orchestra, to follow up and clean up certain things here and there, or to follow up with actors, whether that's with the individual members of the cast, or to gather every once in a while the whole company together and say, hey, this certain thing has gotten a little ragged, or we're all slowing down too much, or whatever it might be, and sort of clean those things up. And you can imagine that in a 3-hour musical, where, if for those who aren't familiar, the show is composed through. So it's about 2 hours and 30 odd minutes of straight music with no dialogue scenes, basically. Which means that there's a lot of music, which means that there's a lot to follow up on. So in addition to that, it's sitting in the house and back in the back of the theater every once in a while, every other week or so, to listen and take notes that way and just report on what I'm hearing, and then follow up that way. My dear friend Kurt, who was the music director before me, we always used to describe music directing Hamilton as the image is like a kitten with a ball of string, because you keep chasing it, but you never quite get it. Because the list of stuff to do is always being added to. But that's the job, is what's visible to the audience. The conducting of the orchestra, I would describe as like 40% of it tops.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of it is the teaching and the maintenance. It's a lot, but I love it.
Yeah. Well, and you're doing an amazing job with that. I'm exhausted actually just by that explanation. I feel like I need to take a nap, but I'm going to muddle through this and get through this, because the people watching need a lot more information. And so, which brings into sort of the next component of what you and I, what I want to speak about with you is that I know how competitive things are. You don't need to tell me. I think everybody knows how competitive the music world is, and you have extraordinary talent. You're able to have this gig, if you will, at Hamilton, one of the most amazing shows on Broadway, and there's a level of stress that comes from all that responsibility you've described. Not in a stressful way, but it stresses me out to hear all those details that you have to be watching for all the time. But there is the added stress, I would think, of all the many talented musicians who are out there in the world who would love to have your job. And I don't say that in a pejorative way against them, but everybody wants their moment in the sun. And I've been treating musicians my whole career, and so I hear these stories, and they're legion. And so that then is the lead-in for what does it feel like? You've graciously offered to discuss a little bit about your wrist problem and how that has impacted you, both psychologically, practically, performance-wise, and so forth. And so would you care to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where I just sort of went mentally is I'm trying to remember. I think I first noticed this wrist injury probably a little over 3 years ago. I noticed that, and I'll come back to the idea of the competitive, as you described, nature, which I find of the job field, which I find to be not that competitive, but we'll come back to it. I noticed about 3 years ago that as I was playing, and the more I was playing Hamilton, especially, and we can get to that too, I was feeling like a little bit of pain and maybe some tingles, but a little bit of pain in the outer corners of my wrist, like here. Mostly just in the left wrist for a while, and then sometime later I started to feel sort of same things in the right side. But it was always sort of right out in the corner, like by the pinky, like sort of around there. And at first it was sort of just bothersome, and more, as I think I've described to you many, many times. I don't know which side you're on, so I'm just going to point to both. As I've described to you many times, it was mostly just annoying rather than anything else, before it became debilitating. And I think I want to sort of choose my words carefully, not because of anything other than I want to try to say this as eloquently as I can using my music school brain, which is that, like, I think the fact that so many people do what we do, and so many people, as you described, would love my job. I'm well aware of that. If I didn't have my job, I would want my job desperately. And I'm really lucky to have it. I love what I do, and I'm grateful to be in that chair. But I think there's something about the fact that, sort of as you described, that if I'm not doing the job of music directing Hamilton on Broadway, there's a list very long of people who not only would be super qualified to do it, but would, like, shove people into traffic in order to have that opportunity. And it's a terrible thing to say. I can't believe I just said that. And yet So there's an element of that, I think, psychologically, as you described, that puts the injury away, or diminishes the injury, maybe, or minimizes the injury for as long as we can. There's a very loud voice that says, well, there's pain in my wrist, but I'm sure it's fine, and better not complain about it, better not say anything, probably for, I don't know, for many reasons, some of which might be not wanting to appear weak, or not wanting to appear not up to the task, or that maybe the powers that be may want to find somebody who is maybe more reliable, or maybe, you know, a little more suited to it, or whatever it may be. So that voice is really loud. And I think the longer I dealt with that wrist injury, and the sort of worse it became, and then the more information I started to get about it by starting to see some doctors and getting some MRIs done, and hearing a lot of people's opinion, and taking time off from playing, and starting some physical therapy, the more time I started to spend with it, the more I started to realize that it's something that I should try to treat on some level. What I should say is that the folks at Hamilton were and continue to be so amazing about this. They have been, over these 3 years and change now, they have been nothing but gracious in terms of giving me the leeway to take some time off for some treatments, or to take some time off of playing certain things, or to limit my playing for the sake of the injury. And that has meant so much to me. There's never been a feeling of, you better get this fixed because we need you to, you know, if this isn't fixed in 6 weeks, you just got to deal with it, or whatever it might be. They have been so gracious about just giving me the space. And as and forgive me if I'm going too far down this path. What were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's very important, and that's not always the case.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they, at every turn, they have been. This is true in the upper management of Hamilton, our sort of general management and producers, as well as stage management, and my immediate bosses, Alex Lackamore especially, who's the music supervisor, have always just said, that sounds great. And that is true. That sounds great. And please heal, and heal completely, and heal quickly, because we care about you. Sure. You know, and it sort of has been a ever evolving and ever winding road of experiments. And I spent a lot of time taking short bursts of time off from Hamilton to try some non-surgical procedures. I got a number of injections of PRP. You're going to know what that stands for. Something plasma.
Platelet-rich plasma.
There we go. I used to know that, which was really interesting. And I found that really kind of nerdy fun and helpful, at least a little bit. I found things like PRP and cortisone and things like that to be at least somewhat helpful in terms of moving the ball a little bit down the road, but nothing completely solving just yet. But I was taking little bursts of time off. I eventually took some time to play at the show only the second keyboard part. That is not the part that's the conductor, but the other keyboard part in the orchestra. And I sort of decided that for however many months, I'm never going to conduct, because that part involves more playing. And we sort of agreed that that was the plan for a while. And then eventually last year, I took, in 2019, I took a full 6 months off of the show to rest and sort of see what that would do, and attempt to, if I never played the piano, really, if I only played a little bit for 6 months, how would that feel? Instead of playing the show every day or every other day, or sometimes twice a day, like what would that do? And that turned out to help a little bit, but not a lot. And so eventually I came to you and went toward a surgical option. And I found that to be helpful, very helpful. And as you know, and as we've discussed, and as I've discussed with many people in my world, it has been super helpful, although not entirely solving yet. And so it still remains a bit of an open question.
Right.
So I realized, I don't know if I answered your question yet, other than to say, I think the big thing that I have had to learn is sort of two things. Is that having an injury does not mean automatically that you are not up to the job, and does not mean that you are disqualified from the job, and also does not mean that if the injury doesn't seem to be improving all the time, that is, if it takes a few steps forward and then a step back or whatever it may be, that doesn't mean it's never going away.
Right.
Yes,
exactly. So I think that's a good transition to you spoke about the support you've had from management, which is, as we said, not always the case. And you have, I know you have plenty of fellow musicians and so forth, and you know that our Musician Treatment Foundation is intended to provide free shoulder, elbow, and hand care for under and uninsured musicians. Now, you have a great gig on Broadway, and so you have insurance through that. Am I correct?
Yeah.
You are insured as a full-time employed musician on Broadway. Obviously, freelance musicians do not have that luxury. Over 43%, at least 43% of pre-COVID, 43% of professional musicians lack adequate or any health insurance. So that adds an element of stress that I think you've been able to avoid because you have such a supportive management, and they've said you get better, you do what you need to do, and so forth. So the only thing I would ask you is, you're experiencing this, and you've had your symptoms, and you've had some care and so forth. So what is it that is specifically going to show us, if you will, demonstrate specifically what was manifesting for you at your piano, at your keyboard, and show us kind of the different styles of playing and how that can impact the manifestation of these symptoms and so forth, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So can you still hear this?
Beautifully,
Great.
yes.
So, I think one of the things that Broadway music can be, as we've learned, many, many different styles. They sort of run the whole stylistic spectrum. The sort of classic Broadway sound is that sort of like, sort of 2-beat light vaudeville kind of thing, but it can be anything, as we've learned. And especially in recent years, in recent decades anyway, the Broadway sound has sort of started to skew toward a pop and rock, mostly kind of contemporary sound. Not always, but a lot of the time. And so that might mean that, like, the reason I bring that up is that if you're a Broadway music director, a lot of the time you're going to be dealing with bass. Because no matter what the style of music in the Broadway ecosystem, you, the music director, or you, the associate music director, or the rehearsal pianist, if you're playing Broadway music as a piano player, you're spending time in rehearsal with actors before the orchestra arrives, which makes it maybe different than if you're playing in an orchestral setting or in a gigging band setting when you show up and you do the job. In this case of playing rehearsals on Broadway, your gig is to emulate the orchestra before the orchestra arrives, which means no matter what the style, you have to provide a sense of groove, a sense of time, a sense of rhythm, perhaps, or especially if you're in a jazz show, or whatever it is, you have to like show the walking bass of some kind. You have to like rely very heavily on emulating rhythm. That isn't always the case. Sometimes you might be doing something really rhythmic and, really orchestral and maybe, and maybe a little bit lighter. But the reason I bring that up is that what makes Hamilton specifically challenging in this regard is the hip hop element. and the groove element. And so we rely so heavily on bass and drums to show what we're doing musically, which means even in the show, there's a lot of heavy left hand stuff going on, but especially in rehearsal without a band, there's a lot of like heavy bass. So the song that I keep thinking about is the song Helpless from the show, which if you know the musical is in middle of Act 1 and is sort of this like 2-chord, sort of like Ashanti R&B kind of bop. And the reason I think about it is that we always teach our pianists, our rehearsal pianists, to think about emulating the whole rhythm section. The left hand is always thinking bass and drums. Which I feel like if we didn't know what we were really going for, and you're a classical player or somebody not used to this music yet or not aware of this music yet, you look at that page of music and what it looks like is, you know, and even I'm cheating a little bit and playing much softer, but it doesn't look like much other than like that it's a bass line. And what we're really looking for at our show is the idea of bass, snare, bass. And what that, in particular, we do this thing with the bass on beat 3. 1. Stuff like that we really want to lean into that bass sound. Cut to what that ends up meaning on my end is I play a lot of heavy left hand pinky. You know, right? And I spend my life playing like heavy left hand stuff.
Yeah.
And I will admit, because I think this is part of it, I don't want to blame the show for this because I'm not. Yeah. I have had poor technique as part of this. And I think those two things combined, I used to play with a lot of tension in my hands and wrists and shoulders. You know, I used to really sort of clam up. I think that came mentally from a place of really trying to concentrate hard and really trying to play hard and trying to play aggressively. And it took me a really long time to learn and unlearn that there is a way to play aggressively and with intention without being so tense and without being so clammed up. And so I think those two things conspired to make this injury into what it is.
So then how many hours do you have to play?
I mean, in my normal, like pre-COVID life, I think a performance of the show is 3 hours long. When you include intermission, it clocks in at just shy of 3 hours. So let's round up to 3 hours. And you're not playing that whole time. You know, the music is going the whole time. You don't play the whole time, but I would venture, God, that you play 70% of it, 80% of it. That's a wild guess, but it's safe to say that you're playing a lot. Sometimes you do that twice in a day. Sometimes you do that just once, but there's maybe rehearsal beforehand. Or maybe even you might meet with an actor before the show to go over a certain thing. So you play 20 or 15 minutes in the dressing room before you go out and do the show. But also, that you might, many of us Broadway people are juggling a lot of projects. So outside of Hamilton in my life, I might spend the day in rehearsal for something else, working on whatever that may be with some other group of singers, some other thing, and then come and play my 3-hour musical at night. So I hesitate
So on a busy day, my calculation, just from your description, you could be playing up to 8 or 9 hours a day, at the minimum, probably 3 or 4. And
if
that's an extraordinary.
If I show up to work at all, chances are I'm gonna, that makes it sound like I'm very lazy, which I am. But if I show up to work in some form, is what I was trying to say. You're going to be playing at the minimum 3 hours. I think it was a rarity, and it does happen where my only interaction with the show for the day is to come to the theater and watch the show in the back. And then you're typing on your laptop, and that's fine. But even then, probably I'm meeting with an actor before or after the show, or working on something else, even at home on an arrangement or whatever that might be. So that in my normal life, pre-COVID, the days when I don't play anything are pretty rare.
Cool. Well, that's really informative. Really great to have this insight into the world, your world of Broadway. It's kind of behind the scenes, and it's really cool to experience that. And maybe this doesn't. You've described having very supportive, again, management and not feeling stressed by that idea. But do you have, and you certainly have friends, you have many friends who are musicians, and can you touch on whether it's yours specifically or people that you know of, the anxiety related to an injury and the implications for your future and how that can impact? Because yes, we provide, in our foundation, we provide free shoulder, elbow, and hand care for needful musicians, but there's a lot more to it. And you and I have even discussed some of this. There's a lot more to it than just the act of making a wrist or a shoulder or an elbow better and the injury itself. Can you touch a little bit on the anxiety that can come from the worry and the anxiety that associated with upper limb injury?
Totally. Our the brain is a dangerous thing sometimes because imagination can do things to you, and I think this is a good question, because I think if you're not careful, if I'm not careful, my imagination can run wild with sort of the worst case scenario of extending whatever it is in here and making it and sort of trying to play it out a little bit. And I'm thinking specifically about, there have been so many times, I joke with my colleagues at Hamilton that when you're up there conducting the show, you're spending 3 hours up there alone on the podium with no one to talk to, and of course you're like doing the job. You're trying to like direct traffic and conduct the musical, but there are times when your brain is less active than others, when things are sort of like moving along, and every once in a while your mind can wander. And if I have found for me that if my hand hurts while I'm playing the show, which sometimes it does, that's a lot of time up on the podium to think about your life. And it's very easy for me, or it was at least very easy for me, to make the leap from, wow, my hand hurts a little bit today, to what if I never get to play the show again? And what if I like have to step away and can't do this job anymore? And to your point from earlier, that how many people would be able to step in and do this without hurting, and because I'm so insecure, would be able to step in and do this without hurting and play it better, or whatever it may be. And the anxiety of making that injury sort of worse in your brain and sort of playing that out, in my brain anyway, is really powerful, and is really a strong force. And I think sort of what I was saying before, that it took me a really long time to know, and I still have to remind myself every once in a while, that not every twinge of pain is career ending. And I'm a young guy. I'm 33 years old, and I hope to have my whole career still ahead of me. And yet there have been plenty of moments where I have worried about, if this doesn't get better, do I need to like become a scientist or something? You know what I mean? Like, and I want to add that it took me a long time to acknowledge that the mental game, the mental part of this, is as important as the physical part of this. I think being in therapy has been just very helpful. Be able to talk this out and just acknowledge that it's something that worries me, and sort of figure that out. But I also have got to say that musicians, I think, as a rule, do not speak up enough about their injuries. And this is true throughout the musical spectrum, Broadway, orchestral, in school, whatever. I've a couple of my closest musician friends and I have talked at length about this, those who have had injuries and those who haven't, that there is, for some reason, as we sort of talked about earlier, like a real taboo on having an injury as a musician. And the same is true for dancers. You know, if you're a dancer and you're unfortunate enough to have a foot injury, that can be a really scary thing to acknowledge and to speak up about. And I have to say that I have learned so much from talking to not only pianists with injuries of their own, similar and not to mine, and how they dealt with it, but violinists with shoulder injuries, trumpet players with lip injuries, conductors with shoulder injuries, any of the above, and guitarists with hand injuries. And it has been so useful and so important to sort of just like exchange experiences and exchange the knowledge that this is a long game, that these things don't just heal, they don't just go away, they don't just get better, and sometimes they get worse before they get better. And I don't know if I've answered your question yet, but the mental piece of this and the anxiety piece of this is a very real thing, at least for me, especially because Hamilton is a very high profile thing. It's an amazing job. It is absolutely my dream job, is the job I have right now. And there is not currently on Broadway, is a different story, but in the current, but pre-COVID on Broadway, there is not another job that I want more. And if I can't do this job right now, that's a very depressing thing to think about. And I've had to really learn to navigate that.
Yeah. And I've heard that story countless times, and thank you for sharing that. And it's so critical. And one of the biggest parts of my job is to convince people. And I say, look, I've never had a musician who wasn't able to continue in their career and to continue doing what they love. And I think that's, doing what you love is so critical. And I think, and I would just say, and this is not in any way to be, pander to your good graces and so forth, but I do firmly believe, since we're expressing these things, that musicians have a special place in our society. I mean, you guys bring us extraordinary happiness, extraordinary peace of mind, extraordinary fluctuations in emotions, all of which speak to us in different ways depending on the style of music and what we particularly respond to. And that to me is a really unique quality, and there are very few other people in the world that provide, I think, such joy and pleasure, especially as just the universal language of music, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't love music? At least some kind of music, right? And so it's just critical. And then you juxtapose that with your own mental health of the joy of making music and making other people happy with your music, and the stress of that added to the actual, just the stress of, or the pain even of that. And so given that you are able to play, can you play something for us and show us part of your amazing talents there in the comfort of your apartment?
Comfort of my apartment. I was sort of thinking about that. What do I do? I could do something Hamiltonian. I could do something. There's a thing that. Oh gosh, you went away. I'm alone here on screen.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
There's a thing that I wrote that's sort of been on my brain in the last day or two. Can I go in that direction?
Yes, by all means.
I'm ashamed to say I wrote this in high school, and I don't think it's been played in the world since then, and probably for good reason. But it's just something that I've been noodling around with again in the last few days. This is This is called The Good Things, and we'll see if I remember any of it. But
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. That was fantastic. That made my day. Thank you.
thank
That's
you.
Wonderful.
Made mine too. That hasn't been out in the open in 15 years.
It needs to be out there then. It
Well,
needs to be out there. Wow. Well, that brings up, you're there alone in your apartment playing, keeping your fingers limber. What's it like to normally be surrounded by so much intensity and so much activity, so many fellow musicians, so many actors, Broadway actors that you're coaching and making sure that everybody's doing the right thing? What's it like for you to be sheltering at home, if you will? How does that felt for you?
Yeah, I'm more used to it now. At first it was an enormous shock, as I think it was to many of us. I think, but we all have our routines that we go through in our lives, whatever they may be. And on Broadway, we have the sort of unique experience of repeating the exact same thing daily. Even beyond playing the same music over and over, it's the same thing of as it's true in some ways for many people, but you go to your same dressing room and you fill up your water at the same spot, and you always pass the same people on your way to the orchestra pit, and you know it's that same sort of like routine thing. And for an actor, it's like they always get their coat from the same person before they go on stage or whatever. It's a very like detailed routine of daily routine. So when that got taken away immediately, and for us, it wasn't even there was no knowledge that we were going to play our last performance. We did our show on Wednesday night. I didn't even do the show on Wednesday night. I was in my office typing notes from that afternoon's matinee to give out the next day.
Yeah.
We all went home. And then on Thursday afternoon, the announcement came from the governor that Broadway was shutting down. And we all got an email, don't come in tonight. And that was it. And so there wasn't a chance to sort of like put a button on it or put a even to like do the thing where we say goodbye to each other. It just sort of like, you know, happened. And so the adjustment was very rocky at first, I think, you know, and I've talked about this with a few of my music director friends, especially. Like, we all went through the process of deleting everything from our calendar. You know, sooner or later, every job we had lined up for the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year, just like went off the calendar. And I will confess that now I am very used to that. I am now like loving having all of this sort of free time that I always wished I could have. You know, I was yearning for a chance to read a book. And now I have that. And so it is definitely unusual. And I feel like I'm guilty of getting very Zoom complacent. Like I no longer really remember what it's like to see a person in real life. But the thing that I have noticed that reminds me how different of a world we're in is when I have tried, in some cases, to try to play music with somebody else remotely. I've done a couple of random like online performances, including with Freestyle of Supreme, to try to play music live on the internet with another person remotely. And I have a very close friend who's working on some solutions to the inevitable delays that come up and that sort of thing. And so I've tried some experiments, and even when like collaborating by email on a musical project, we always inevitably say to each other, gosh, this would be so much easier if we were just in the same room. And could like sit around the same piano and just like figure it out. It would go so much faster. And boy, do I miss. I'll add on one other thing. We put together a short little video for Hamilton a couple weeks ago, just for ourselves, just internal in the company, where we asked all of our string section to. Oh my gosh, I'm getting a phone call. Decline. Although I love you, Lucas. I'll call you back. Forgive me. We asked all of the string players in our orchestra, the 4 players in our string section, to record something. And my dear friend Kurt wrote an amazing arrangement. And just like we've seen many of these videos in this time, they record separately, and I put it together and so on. But there was, you know, we've seen so many of those, and they're all wonderful. But there was something particularly affecting about seeing those 4 people that I know and love so much, that I see so regularly, playing together. Even though it was false, it was manufactured. You know, there was something so amazing about, oh my God, there they are, the 4 of them. And so I miss that very much. I'm very excited someday to get to play music with real people again. Yeah,
good. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time, your insights, your heart, your knowledge, your willingness to discuss these things for us and for our viewers. I know that we will have you live somehow, some way in the future. You're very generous with your talent and your time, and I'm so grateful for all the. I speak, I think, for the world, or grateful for all that you give us through the joy of music, of listening, and your immense talent. So thank you. And
Thank you.
And the Musician Treatment Foundation thanks you, and for all of the musicians who are not quite as lucky as you to have a great gig like that, who are continuing to plow through and be creative and bring joy to the rest of us. We thank all of them. So we'll see you again in real life. I know.
I hope so. And thank you for having me and giving me the space to talk about all things Hamilton, but also the injury and how that has played into everything. And thank you for your willingness now and in the past and in the future, yours personally, for your help and your wisdom and your ability to help me navigate it. I'm very grateful.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day and night, I guess. And just I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Bye-bye.